This is between Vincent Chabalala Road and the Buccleuch interchange due to long-term roadworks. There's also queuing traffic in Protea Glen along the R558 and the N12 West due to faulty traffic lights.
A partly cloudy day in store for Gauteng with isolated showers and thunder showers expected. The temperatures will peak at highs between 26 and 30 degrees. The top story in EWN this hour: the ad hoc committee investigating alleged police corruption has resumed in Parliament this morning, where discussions shifted to calls for DA committee member Diane Kohler-Barnard's recusal.
EWN, in touch, in tune and independent. For the latest, visit ewn.co.za or download the EWN app.
You're with Clement Manyathela
On 702.
Let's Walk the Talk, streaming on the Prime Media Plus app,
DSTV channel 856.
92.7 and 106 FM.
7 minutes after 10 o'clock. Dumelang, welcome to the second hour of the Clement Manyathela Show. Thank you so much for staying with us here on 702. And once again, thank you for all your calls and your WhatsApps and your tweets on the 702 open line. Thank you for your comments on YouTube as well, because we've been streaming the shows live on YouTube. In fact, if you are watching us on YouTube right now, you'll see that I am not in studio where I was broadcasting for in the previous hour. I am in our entertainment area on the third floor here at Prime Media House, and I'm here with our colleague Mandy Wiener, who has published a new book, because that's what she does. I mean, this is what, fourth?
Seventh.
Oh, seventh book. That's what Mandy does.
So you play golf, I write books.
I guess. So we're going to be talking to Mandy about the new book titled The Deal, and I've been telling you about it since, in fact, when I had the manuscript, when you gave me the manuscript. I've had the pleasure of reading the book before it was published. Funny enough, Mandy, I've actually never actually read this book, but I've gone through the manuscript. But there's not a lot that has changed from the manuscript to the book.
Except an interview with the president.
Which you have already briefed me about. So we're going to be looking at The Deal. It's a fascinating book, and I've said this before. Mandy takes us through the behind-the-scenes talks when we were all wondering, what is this country going to look like? There were conversations taking place, some of which were secret. There was flying popcorn at some point with people being anxious and excited. There are people who went to meetings, and there's a certain party that didn't pitch for a meeting, and I'll get you to guess which party that is. But there's a lot that's happened behind the scenes that Mandy takes us through. And I mean, I consider myself a political animal, and even I didn't know about most of the details that Mandy shares in this book. And we've got a live audience here at our entertainment area with us. How are you guys doing? Are we good? Thank you so much for coming through. It's always great to broadcast in front of a live audience, because then I can see your faces, because often we speak on the phone, and today we can see who you really are. Mandy Wiener, welcome. How are you?
Thank you so much. And
normally we speak just before 12 o'clock.
And I tell you what's coming up on my show. So
Yeah.
thank you very much for doing this and for taking the time to read the book and for giving me a shout quote for the cover. Your name is also on the cover of the book.
Yes, it is on the cover of a book, and it's my first shout quote, everybody. Am I going to get a clap for that? So, we're going to give you guys an opportunity to also ask some questions. You can give us a call on 011-883-0702. You can send us a WhatsApp voice note as well on 072-702-1702. For some of you that are here in the live audience, we've got 2 roving mics that will go around. I don't want to be selfish and hog Mandy to myself. If you've got inputs, you've got some questions, I want you to feel free to just raise your hand, and then we'll give you the mic and you can ask your question or give the input. Mandy, I want to begin. I remember the first time we covered the elections, in fact, the first time I was at the same place with you, was it Joubert Park? Remember?
Yes.
We're at Joubert Park, and there was a long queue, and all of us were wondering, what is the country going to look like after the elections? Because we saw what the polls were saying about how the ANC may perform other political parties. Did you know in that moment that we're just about to witness history here?
I got a sense, and I think all of us in the media had a sense, that for the first time the ANC would come in below 50%. And I think that from many of the people that we were speaking to at Midday Park, one old lady stood out for me, and I interviewed her, and she said that she had voted in every single election, from Mandela to Mbeki through to Zuma, Clement Manyathela Ramaphosa, and she said that she spoke about why it felt important for her to vote. And many people said that it felt like 1994. There was that same atmosphere. There were the long queues. That was also because of the zip machines that were problematic, which I write about quite a bit. But there wasn't a sense of expectation that there was going to be change, that the monolithic ANC was crumbling, that it would not come in above 50%. I don't think we anticipated how well MK would do and that the ANC would come low 40s. My expectation was 45, 46, and they would land up having a coalition with a few smaller parties. I'm not sure that I anticipated a GNU.
So at what point then did you think this is a historic moment worth documenting? Did you go into the elections knowing that I actually want to write a book about these elections?
Not at all. Not at all.
At what point did you think I've got to document this?
I think a few days after the results came out, when these negotiations were happening behind closed doors, and there was a sense from the ANC that they had been watching a horror show, as Ramaphosa described it to me, and that this was going to be a real fundamental change in our political landscape, and it was a seminal moment. And throughout my career, and even as a teenager, I loved reading accounts from journalists, non-fiction accounts. So, for example, Alistair Sparks' Tomorrow's Another Country, or Ankie Kroch, Country of My Skull, or Patty Waldmeyer's book, which I based a lot of this on in terms of structure as well, about, the miracle of the 1994 negotiations. And I thought, we need to document this, firstly. It's so important that we record history as journalists for posterity, that journalists write the first draft of history. And also, I was curious. I wanted to know what was going on behind the scenes. But also, I think South Africans deserve to know. I think we are absolutely entitled to know what negotiations are going on in these rooms. Otherwise, it becomes, smoky rooms and clandestine chats, and we need to know all of that.
And we'll get through some of how the negotiations unfolded, because I really find it interesting how some parties positioned themselves and what each party intentioned to do with the GNU, because the ANC had its own idea, so did the Democratic Alliance, and you've got all the other parties that also thought, what's going to be our role in this GNU? But before we get there, was it difficult for you to decide who to talk to and document their stories and experiences in the book? Because you've got a lot of parties that are part of the GNU, but to make it more complex, you've got many units within each organization, especially the ANC, who were part of negotiations. There was this one group that was negotiating, and then the next thing, you've got another group that's also part of the negotiations. How did you figure out who to talk to, and how many did you end up chatting to?
Sure, it was a challenge. I had to cast a very wide net. So firstly, the ANC had a very big technical team, and then they have a lot of other players that were playing a role. So people on the NEC. So I started with Fikile Mbalula, the Secretary General, who was enormously helpful. He responded straight away, and he said, come and see me. And then I went through the formal channels of the ANC, and I wrote a list of about 20 people in the ANC I wanted to interview. Some didn't happen, some declined, some ignored requests, but somebody like Phoebe Porkita Kobule, who was really the backbone with David Makura and Nkenke Kekana of the technical team, was fantastic. She spent many hours with me, giving me the backstory, and really one of the unsung members of that ANC technical team, because she did a lot of the hard graft, and it was great to spend time with her. And then I felt it important to try and speak to different factions. I spoke to different people. I spent quite a bit of time with Nomvula Mokonyane. I spoke to Fikile Mbalula, Cyril Ramaphosa, and Nkenke Kekana. I begged and tried, and eventually the day before going to print, he agreed and gave me a lot of insight. And with the other political parties, I spoke to most of them. In the end, I interviewed over 25 politicians. It was almost 100 hours of interviews. And I couldn't speak to every single member of the GNU. But I did feel it important to speak to somebody like Mzwanele Nehonso, who's the leader of the PAC. And his story is great because it's untold. And to get that experience of how he was almost bullied by the ANC members into joining the GNU, he was proper hustled. So that kind of stuff is great. Gaten McKenzie, the FF Plus, the IFP. I tried to tell as full a story as possible.
All right, let's get to the meat now. On page 52 of the book, you tell a story of John Steenhuisen typing a WhatsApp message, and I'm going to read this part here. John Steenhuisen typed a WhatsApp message on his phone to President Cyril Ramaphosa's personal number. He congratulated him on the election results and suggested that it was time for the adults to have a conversation. A little while later, Ramaphosa responded saying that he agreed and would be in touch. Collegial, it appears, but at the end, of course, there was a lot that had happened where, as you tell in the book, the president would share how he feels about John Steenhuisen. But let's start with John. How does he feel about, from the conversation you've had with him, how the negotiation was done and how the losses were registered for the Democratic Alliance? Because they didn't get all the ministerial positions that they wanted. They had to make lots of concessions. How does he negotiations started things are right now?
So firstly, there was a lot of debate within the DA's own negotiating team about what strategy they should take. And as Ryan Coetzee tells me, for the first week, he and Helen Zille just fought. And they just fought. And the creative differences, as Tony Leon describes, between Helen Zille and Tony Leon, resulted in some people call it a stand-up screaming match. Other people may refer to it as just an emotional spat on the pavement outside the Sun Square Hotel in Cape Town, in Gardens, where they were literally standing on the pavement and yelling at each other, and Helen waved her finger at John dismissively, and she said it wasn't a big deal, and he was upset. So that kind of stuff I give the account of in the book. But ultimately, the question I ask all of the members of the DA is a question that our colleague Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh has posed, and I felt it important to get their answer on this, is did the ANC lose the elections but win the negotiations? And Helen Zille felt very strongly about this. In fact, after our 4-hour interview, she actually sent me a long document detailing why she didn't believe that was the case. And she feels that, firstly, there was enormous pressure from the public, from the media, from the business sector. So I think that ultimately they feel that they did walk away with a satisfactory deal, that they perhaps could have got more cabinet positions, but they did end up with what they thought was satisfactory.
I often wondered whether they would be extreme in their requests, because that's like a negotiating tactic. Go extreme so that if you land, you don't really land lower. Was that the strategy they were going with?
Yes and no. So they did have some red lines. They did have some debate about different models they could follow. And as one of the ideas that they came up with was a strategy that would see them get 6 cabinet positions. And they very early, and a lot of them were unhappy about this, almost showed their hand to the ANC. And in fact, there was a lot of finger pointing amongst the DA members about how exactly this was shown to the ANC. So they did give their hand away a little bit in terms of how many cabinet positions they actually wanted. But then, of course, if you cast your mind back, and you remember this period when there were those letters being exchanged between John Steenhuisen and Cyril Ramaphosa, and Helen Zille and Fikile Mbalula, all of those letters, they give the backstory to as well. And John Steenhuisen speaks about the strategy with that one very controversial letter, which he calls the dead cat letter.
In fact, I've got a clip of John Steenhuisen having a conversation with you. Let's take a listen.
And it was to basically jolt them into actually realizing that actually we were serious here. And I know the media had a meltdown, about that letter, but it was important because it was kind of like a reset, and it gave us an opportunity to have the reset. Throw the dead cat thing, throw dead cats on the table, change the conversation, which had been stalling and that sort of thing, to actually like Ryan's thing, agitate and churn the waters so that you can. Is that
what you were doing with that letter?
Yeah, form a reset. Yeah, form a reset. You need something that's going to shift the conversation. Ryan said. So let's send this letter and make these sort of outrageous demands, and it then makes everything you do afterwards seem slightly more reasonable as well.
So that is John Steenhuisen in that conversation with Mandy Wiener. Mandy, one of the things that some people anticipated was that the ANC was going to at least have a conversation with the MK party and the EFF. And you write in the book on page 127 where Helen Ziller says, and I quote, we said to them, we're working on the proper definition of what a government of national unity is, which includes the biggest parties, right? So they said no. The EFF, the MK have excluded themselves. So that's not our understanding of it. So we realized pretty quickly that they were calling it the government of national unity so that they didn't have to call it a coalition with the Democratic Alliance. Probably the most honest to describe really what happened, whether the ANC denies it or not. I want us to listen to a clip of President Cyril Ramaphosa talk about the shock of the MK party's success at the polls, and I want you to come in and help us understand why the ANC was strategic about going this way as opposed to going with the EFF and the MK party. This is Cyril Ramaphosa speaking to Mandy Wiener.
So my expectation was a clean 54%. Notwithstanding what the surveys and the pundits were saying, I did not believe them. In the end, I think my expectations were dashed by one entity and party, which is the MK. I did not expect that they would get 14%. I really didn't. I thought that they would come in at about 5% or so. So in the end, I hold the belief that the votes that they got were really ANC votes. And we, I guess, made a mistake by thinking that they would come in at a much lower level.
So what did that mean then for how the ANC negotiates this coalition?
Well, what happened then was that there was some very intense conversations happening within the ANC's top seven, but also the ANC NEC. And Kenkeke kind of speaks about how when the technical team first went to go and brief the top seven, he said Ramaphosa was grey. He said that his biggest fear was that Ramaphosa would resign. And when I asked Ramaphosa about this, he said he never considered resigning, that he felt that they needed leadership to go through this. So then the ANC NEC was divided. There were deep discussions around whether or not they should pursue a GNU. There were various models on the table. You remember this. Whether or not they should go into a coalition with the MK, EFF and Patriotic Alliance, or whether or not they should go into an alliance with perhaps the DA, IFP, Freedom Front Plus. So there were lots of options on the table, ultimately. And when the president announced that they were going to pursue a GNU, the ANC created the impression that it was going into a GNU inviting all political parties. So they left the door open to the MK and to the EFF. There were several meetings with the EFF, and many of the ANC people I spoke to were very upset by how the EFF behaved, particularly Floyd Shabambu in one of those meetings. The MK blue-ticked them. They didn't respond for a while. And what the DA did was they employed what they called the last man standing strategy. And the last man standing strategy was that they would stick around until the EFF and MK excluded themselves. So they knew that the ANC was still speaking to the other parties, but they were going to make their offer as enticing as similarly aligned in policies, centrist policies to the Constitution, that the ANC had no choice but to go with them, but that the EFF and MK wouldn't be willing to agree to those terms.
I wonder, Mandy, because reading the book, it feels like the Democratic Alliance was more prepared for the negotiations than any of the organizations. I mean, the ANC probably, they didn't realize that they're going to go down to 40%. But when you read the book, you realize that the DA had these strategies. It's almost like they prepared this even before the elections. Did you get that sense that they came to the negotiation table more prepared than the other parties?
They literally prepared the strategy. So a few of them, and I detail this in the book as well, met at Tony Leon's house and scenario planned. So they role-played. So Jordan Hill-Lewis and John Steenhuisen, they actually role-played different scenarios. So if this happens, what do we do? What is the counter-argument? So they had done that work. I think John Steenhuisen called it election day plus 1, election day plus 10, plus 15. I can't remember the exact term, where they did, okay, what happens 10 days after the election? What happens 15 days after the election? So they really had, as they say, thrown the ball around quite a bit going into this.
Yeah.
The ANC, I do think that they had strategy documents, but I'm not sure that they were as prepared on the kind of nuts and bolts and really getting into the granular detail.
I mean, the document of intent just demonstrates that. They didn't agree on a lot of things, on the interpretation of certain clauses of the document of intent. And we'll get to that later on. But I want you to tell us, before we get to the headlines, the role of the private sector in all of this. So while the negotiations are taking place behind the scenes, what do we understand then about the pressure that the private sector is putting? And I mean, we spoke about this, and you do document what I said on my show when I was talking about the markets.
This was a big role player, a big character in this entire story, was the role of the business of the markets. It's something that you spoke about at the time, and there were different views on this. So within business, there was a lot of pressure on both the ANC and the DA to reach a deal, because business wanted stability. They wanted to make sure that the ANC didn't go with MK or EFF. Advocate Dalian Mpofu speaks about this, how in fact he believes that this deal was decided beforehand, not in practical terms. It wasn't actually agreed, because that's what I actually thought, was that maybe they'd had the discussion before, but they hadn't. And there was so much pressure from big business and from the markets, the threat of the bottom falling out of the rand, what that meant for South African citizens when it comes to inflation, when it comes to the cost of living. There was also pressure being applied by certain individual businessmen. The funders of the DA are also mentioned, coming in to lean on some members of the DA who weren't so keen on a GNU. And that's a thread throughout the book, where both Helen Zille, Tony Leon speak about the phone calls they were getting. The ANC speaks about the leverage that was being applied. And in fact, the president told me about a meeting he had with big business, where he basically told them to get lost. And he said, you've been decampaigning the ANC, you've been bad-mouthing us to Janet Yellen, you have been funding other parties, so go and speak to them. And don't bully me and put pressure on me, rather go speak to the other party. So he took quite a strong line on that.
10:30, time for the latest in Eyewitness News headlines. When we come back, I want to take questions from the floor. I want to take questions from you listening from the office while you're driving. You can give us a call on 011-883-0702. I'm taking your WhatsApps as well on 072-702-1702. Good morning.
Thanks, Clement. Good morning. The ad hoc committee investigating alleged police corruption has resumed in Parliament this morning, where discussions shifted to calls for DA committee member Diane Kohler Barnard's recusal. Members of the committee want her removed after she was named by KZN top cop Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi for allegedly mishandling classified intelligence information. Former President Clement Manyathela says despite some issues with the implementation of broad-based black economic empowerment, the policy should be expanded rather than scrapped. Manyathela was speaking at the Frank Dialogue event in Sandton, which looked at the history and future of triple BEE. Manyathela says that the policy needs to evolve and close loopholes that allow for abuse. And the Turkish president says he was persuaded by US President Donald Trump to ask Hamas to accept peace deals in the Gaza war. Erdogan revealed this in a transcript that has been shared by to the public by his office. He says during his visit to the US, he explained to Trump how a solution could be achieved in Palestine, and that's when he was asked to meet with the Palestinian militant group to persuade them. And those are the headlines. This EWN and more at 11 or as it happens.
EWN Traffic.
Traveling on the N3 North, we still have got those delays between Vincent Chabalala Road and the Baklu interchange. That's due to roadworks. There's also queuing traffic on the M1 South due to more roadworks taking place right near Smith Street. Delays from Empire Road while traveling along the Golden Highway towards the Devlin Freedom Park areas. Do expect heavier traffic volumes due to roadworks as well as faulty traffic lights at Union Avenue. Traveling in the city of Tshwane, do remember that that protest activity, or rather a march, is taking place along the several roads of the city of Tshwane. Routes that are certainly to be affected by traffic volumes includes Sophie de Bruyn, Madiba Street, as well as Lillian Ngoyi Street. So please, if you're traveling within the city of Tshwane this morning, please be on the lookout and plan your trips ahead of time. More updates coming up at the top of the hour. Stay tuned.
There's more EWN on air, online, and on the EWN app. Aubrey Masango.
Weekday evenings,
8 to midnight.
The Parliamentary Ad Hoc Committee into the allegations made by Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi kicked off. It is a platform of politicians. What I can guarantee you is that we are about to watch a spectacle. So what are they going to do? They're going to take this moment to subtly campaign for their own political parties. It's the very same parliament that ignored the same information that Mkhwanazi gave them a few months ago. Now that the cameras are going to be on them,
Aubrey Masango.
8 to midnight on 702.
702.
Fellow taxpayers, make tax matters a #1 priority by submitting your personal income tax return by the 20th of October 2025 deadline. Once your tax return is submitted, you'll receive a notice of assessment stipulating if there's any tax assessed debt due to SARS or not. Should you owe, it's crucial to settle tax obligations on time to avoid any penalties or interest charges. SARS, at your service.
So Taryn, you've just graduated cum laude, but nothing says you're a genius quite like selling your car to We Buy Cars.
Absolutely. My car was an 18th birthday present and it's time to move on to something a bit more mature.
So where did you hear about We Buy Cars?
All of my friends are using We Buy Cars. I would have had legit FOMO if I hadn't used them. And it was so quick. I did it on my laptop while sending around my CV.
Smart move, Taryn. Graduated and upgraded. We Buy Cars. Geared for success. Geared for you.
Spring is in the air, meaning it's almost time for the 10th SA Garden Day on Sunday the 12th of October. Celebrate the day with a garden party, lunch under the trees, or cake at a community garden, and invite your friends, family or neighbours to enjoy your garden with you. Visit gardenday.co.za for inspiration and share pictures of your celebration on social media with #GardenDaySA. SA Garden Day, Sunday the 12th of October.
As South Africa assumes the G20 presidency in 2025, 702 and Standard Bank Group bring you exclusive conversations with the voices shaping Africa's economic future.
The G20 has really, I think, provided us with a number of platforms to be able to engage across a wide range of stakeholders. And I think one of the areas that this is very helpful in is around being able to engage in advocacy for an enabling environment. If we look at the task force that the infrastructure and finance task force that the group has been involved in, it's really thinking about how we can unlock capital, our sustainable infrastructure development and inclusive growth. And so we have really used this as an opportunity to bring the stakeholders together.
Brought to you by Standard Bank Group on 702. Standard Bank is an authorized FSP and registered credit provider.
You're with Clement Manyathela.
702. Let's walk the talk.
24 minutes before 11 o'clock, you are listening to really the special broadcast, special hour of the Clement Manyathela Show. We're here with our colleague Mandy Wiener, who has launched a new book, The Deal. It's at Exclusive Books. You can go check it out anywhere and go buy it. It's The Deal, Inside the Talks that Shaped South Africa's Future. I mean, we're not getting through every single detail of the book because you have to go read it. But there's some funny moments as well. In fact, there's a moment where Helen Zille was at a meeting, and the ANC didn't pitch for the meeting. And Helen actually says, and I quote here, Mandy writes, Zille made a last-ditch attempt. Quote, I thought, well, one thing's going to get them here. If one thing's going to get them here, it's the food. because they're used to the Inanda Club. I have to show them what standards they're getting here. So I took a video of the food and I sent it to Phoebe, and I said to Phoebe, get here quickly because we're not going to leave you much lunch. So that's Helen Zille trying to get the ANC to quickly come to the meeting. So lots of funny moments about what's been happening behind the scenes as the formation of the GNU was underway. I want to take some questions now. Can we have some hands? Palisa here in the front. There's two here, one at the back. So let's start maybe with 3 questions for now, and then we'll take some later on. Please give us your name and your surname and your question or input.
No,
go ahead.
Am I on?
Yes, you are, brother.
Thank
go
you
ahead.
so much. My name is David Khasaro. I do listen to 702, more especially to Clement and Wendy. This book is very interesting. But my question is, do you think ANC was so strategic to form the GNU so that they can survive politically? In contrast, do you think ANC compromised themselves politically? Because you know that there's other faction that doesn't support the GNU. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you for that. So I do think they were very strategic, and I write about this in the book, how they were very intentional about bilaterals. And the way that they structured the negotiations was they set up shop at the Inanda Club, which, Helen Zille remarks, is one of the, most colonial luxury options they could have gone for. And they set up separate meeting rooms and 2 different teams. And it was almost like a doctor's waiting room. That's how Bantu Holomisa describes it, where each negotiating team was waiting to come in to the meetings with the different negotiating teams of the ANC. So they never got everybody under one roof. They never had all the negotiating teams there. They met with them individually. And I think the ANC was very strategic about that because they played each party off against the other. The Freedom Front Plus was very unhappy with the way that was conducted. Bantu Holomisa was very unhappy. But as Gayton McKenzie says, he thinks that the ANC and Ramaphosa specifically was brilliant, is how he put it. He said they were brilliant and the reason that they were brilliant was because of the strategy. And I asked Ramaphosa a few questions about this, Clement, where I said, for example, did you run the clock down on the DA on that morning of the 14th of June? And he just leaned back and started laughing and said, thank you. So it was very strategic the way that the ANC ran these negotiations, which is why, I've asked them all this question. Do you think that the ANC lost the elections but won the negotiations? Fikile Mbalula said to me that and created this, says this often, where he says this is a temporary measure. The ANC is going to come back and win a majority. And they're just looking at the GNU as a momentary stopgap approach. I don't know if you agree with that. I don't agree with that. I think that our political landscape is forever changed.
Well, just like Cyril Ramaphosa did, I'm going to sit back and say thank you. I'm not responding to that. Palisa?
Hi, Clement and Mandy. Congratulations on the book, Mandy. A lot of the time people look at the DA as this battered woman who was forced into this marriage with the ANC. But my view on it is they knew exactly what they were doing, and they're that spouse that waits for the right moment to have a divorce where they have the best settlement. I want to know what's your view on that. And then secondly, when Cyril Ramaphosa became president of the ANC, there was this hope that he is, the person that's going to turn everything around. And when you look at where the ANC is now, there's been so many challenges, load shedding, thank God it's gone now, corruption, losing of the votes. Do you think that he's just a victim of poor leadership, or has he just been the straw that broke the camel's back, that is the ANC?
Thank you, Palisa. So I do think that what we're seeing, to use your analogy, is the parents staying together in an unhappy marriage for the kids. And that's how you describe the GNU at the moment between the ANC and the DA. They went into this marriage on unhappy terms. I don't think that the DA was ever quite satisfied with the prenup. And I think that now and because the ANC is not sticking to it either. So that's the big issue for the DA, is that they fundamentally do not believe that the ANC has respected the statement of intent. And they are now in this marriage. They are effectively an opposition in government. The ANC is unhappy with the way that they're behaving. Ramaphosa says he's very disappointed in how the DA is behaving. So they're in this unhappy marriage, but they realize that they can't leave. And they need to look after the kids. And the kids are you and me. And the kids are the citizens out there, and the economy, the future of the country. So I do think that that's where we are in terms of that analogy. In terms of the leadership of Ramaphosa, I think that firstly he gets a lot of criticism, and rightfully so, in the sense that he is overly consultative. I asked him about this, about his approach and his consultative approach, and he feels very strongly that, and he subscribes to the Mandela belief of consultation, where he felt it was important, and that's demonstrated through these negotiations, that he felt he needed to take everyone along with him. And he felt that he needed to take the ANC along, that he needed to convince, they needed to talk. And this is one of the cultural disconnects between the ANC and the DA. The ANC is overly consultative. So in an NEC meeting, everybody gets 2 minutes. They go through 80 people, 7 people, everyone gets a chance to speak. In the DA, it's like a bit chaotic, and everyone voices their opinion. So I think that's just Ramaphosa's approach to leadership and how he leads.
There, over here. Hold on. Can we check if it's on? And then we will get the question. Should be fine.
Hi. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
Hi, my name is Franz Gate. I've got two takeaways from what's been said so far. You mentioned that the ANC lost the election, but won the negotiation. And the other side of one of the other comments was the DA were more prepared for the GNU talks. So can I take from that, if they weren't as prepared as they were, they would have lost out on even more seats that they were fighting for, because they definitely were going for more important portfolios. And secondly, you mentioned that Ramaphosa was quite harsh and said, go back and speak to the private business people that were backing them. But were those companies and business people not backing the ANC as well?
Some of them were, and some of them were acting as conduits as well through the back channels. So there were some very well-known businessmen who were acting as conduits and were almost negotiating both sides. And I think that was very important. I think those back channels were crucial. And that's why Ramaphosa could have these conversations with them. And I think a lot has to be said for the role played by the back channels. Because there was one thing, I don't think a lot of the getting down to the brass tacks in the meetings, there wasn't a lot of that actually happened in terms of real discussions. A lot of that was happening through the back channels. And it was only when it came to crunch time that they really, the technical team and Helen Zille, primarily with Ryan Coetzee, really got down to working out the minutiae of this. So the back channels were important. On your first question of whether the ANC lost the election but won the negotiations and if the DA wasn't prepared, I think that ultimately what the DA's view was that it didn't matter how many seats they got in the end, was that they just felt that by having a presence in government, they were able to contribute to the leadership of the country. The big fight was around the Department of Trade and Industry. They felt very strongly that they wanted DTRC. The president offered them DTRC and then almost revoked that. And I asked the president about that as well, and he was like, no, it wasn't quite like that. He was a bit more vague in his response about it. So I think that the DA was more focused on getting important portfolios, not the number of portfolios. That's what it came down to them.
I want to play some WhatsApp voice notes. I'll come back to the floor. I'll give you another bite at this. WhatsApp voice notes are coming on 072 702 1702.
Oh, hello, Clement and Mandy there. I just want to know, just from a practical aspect, what was involved in the writing of a book of this nature? I mean, the work behind all of the research and having to, the behind the scenes, getting access to some of those exclusive details. What does it involve? Because having to read it is just nice, but I just want to know the level of work that was put into it, the level of detailed research and investigation and just all of it. I just want to know the level of work that was put into this, because it's quite outstanding. Prince in Bedfordview.
A question to Mandy. Helen Zille still leads the DA in terms of strategic thinking. Would she agree or not?
All right. Thank you so much for your questions. Mandy?
On the second one, I think it's not so much Helen Zille, it's the FedEx of the DA. And this was one of the points of contention where Tony Leon and Ryan Coetzee felt that it wasn't necessary for the negotiating team to keep going back to the FedEx every few minutes to get a mandate. Whereas Helen Zille has the support of the FedEx, and she felt that in that organization, that's what should happen, was going back to the FedEx. So I think the FedEx is the strategy. The president alludes to the fact that there are two centers of power within the DA, and he speaks about his relationship with John. And in fact, this is something that I asked him about that I'd like to play a clip of, because I asked the president about his relationship with John, and he drew the parallels with Rolf Meyer, his negotiating partner at CODESA in the early 1990s. And that gives you some insight into, firstly, his views on John Steenhuisen, but also on how he's not sure who is actually calling the shots in the DA. Take a listen.
Relationship. And I never had the sense that in my dealings with Rolf, I would be sort of dealing with other people where he would immediately go and rat on me in terms of what I said or be reporting to others. That type of relationship where you have a sense that there are third parties who are listening to everything you're doing. I don't have the same with Steenhuisen, unfortunately. Each time I meet with Steenhuisen, I have a sense that he goes out and tweets and immediately goes on social media. And when you deal with somebody like that, you hold back because you always are on guard. Is he going to be revealing some of the things that we've been talking about, and that is lacking, and that magic is lacking between the two of us.
Magic is lacking between the two of them. I suppose it explains why sometimes there are these disagreements that happen, whether on policy issues, where then the DA will say, this is a red line, but it takes longer to resolve the issues. Because if the two leaders of the organization got along, I mean, just like he WhatsApped him and congratulated him, as you document in the book, and said, it's time for the adults to speak, surely every time there was a deadlock, the adults would have spoken.
A caveat on that, John Steenhuisen responded to me by saying, well, he hasn't been on Twitter for a few years. So he said that he doesn't agree with that. I think a lot of this comes down to the relationship between the two leaders.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were stressing that there were a lot of overtures made early on in the negotiations to get them both in a room together. And some of the views were that the ANC was deliberately holding Ramaphosa back as a strategy, so that they could use him at the last minute. So as the clock ticked down on the 14th of June, Ramaphosa stepped in and made the changes, and it ultimately came down to him, and they could use that as leverage. But there were meetings. So there was a meeting between John Steenhuisen and President Ramaphosa. There was one in Cape Town at Genadendal. There was one at his home in Hyde Park. And then there was that very important mellowing moment, as Ramaphosa described it, where John Steenhuisen took him a bottle of Nick and 40's Epicenter, a bottle of wine, at Maklamba and Dlopfu, and they went to look at the vista, Mandela's favorite view over the capital, and Ramaphosa describes that as a mellowing moment. And Steenhuisen reckons that's what got the deal over the line.
Fascinating stuff. It's 8 minutes now before 11 o'clock. After the break, I'll come back with some more questions here at Prime Media House. Stay with us.
Bongani Bingwa, 702 Breakfast.
Weekday mornings, 6 to 9.
Part of what Israel doesn't realise is that the love for the Palestinians worldwide is far greater than our fear of them. And they are only building it and building it and building it. And Palestine will be liberated and Israel will be held to account. It's just a matter of time, and we will keep speaking. We will keep doing what we need to do. It's part of what humanity is today. And the gauge of humanity is with Palestine at the moment.
Robert Martin, an Australian activist who was arrested and detained by the Israeli forces 6 weeks ago.
Bongani Bingwa, 6 to 9.
On 702.
Hey besties, welcome to my kitchen tour, or should I say my new walk-in wardrobe. Over here we have the pantry, now home to my jeans and shirts, all color-coded. Oh, and the air fryer, literally the perfect place for my makeup brushes. And who would have thought, the oven is the place to store my handbags.
Who needs a kitchen? Simply spend 200 Rand or more and you could win Simply Asia for a year. T's and C's apply. Simply Asia, connecting the Thai way.
It's that time of the year. Sneezing, itchy, watery eyes, blocked noses and coughs. It's time to live, work, play and sleep allergy-free. For trusted relief for you and your family this allergy season, ask your pharmacist for the Adcock Ingram OTC Allergy Survival Pack. With products like Allergex Non-Drowsy, Cetisid, Levogex, and more, we have you covered. Remember, Adcock Ingram OTC. And visit beprepared365.co.za.
Did you know that all residential complexes are legally required to register with the Community Scheme Ombud Service, or CSOS? Registration is easy and it's free. All registered schemes can access a quick and affordable alternative dispute resolution body and can also learn more about the rights and responsibilities of people living within a community scheme. We'd like to appeal to all unregistered community schemes to register with the CSOS today. Visit csos.org.za to find out more.
Your voice.
Your questions.
Your morning radio with Clement Manyathela.
This is 702.
Oh my goodness, where did that time go? It's 6 minutes before 11 o'clock, and I want to wrap up with a few questions from the floor. But before we do, Mandy, Paul Mashatile actually met with Gayton McKenzie, and which is quite interesting. Once again, it points to these different meetings that are taking place. You never know who actually is negotiating in the African National Congress. From what you were documenting, what did you make of that meeting?
Yeah, I was surprised by this. And, Gates McKenzie told me so many funny stories. He told me this funny story about when he was about to be appointed. The president phoned him and he was watching a movie and the popcorn went flying. He said this old white lady was just staring at him because his popcorn was flying everywhere and his bodyguards were all there with their guns out. But he told me the story about how when the negotiations were at the brink and there was this rumor of the alternative deal that was on the table, and the alternative deal would have seen the Patriotic Alliance and the EFF going with the ANC, Gayton and Julius Malema being deputy presidents. That was what he legitimately was on the table for Gayton McKenzie. And he speaks about how Paul Mashatile called him to a meeting or lunch. He invited him to lunch at Riverville in Waterfall. And he and Kenny Kunene went to go meet, and they thought, oh, here this guy is busy with a palace coup, and Mashatile wants to oust Ramaphosa. And in fact, Mashatile was urging them to stay in the GNU and to not make an alternative deal. And Gayton McKenzie says he and Kenny left there and were like, what was that? What just happened? Because they were not expecting this guy who was supposedly busy with a palace coup to be urging them to stay in the GNU.
Prince asked you a question about what it took to research, to also wait for these interviews. I know you've waited quite a long time for some people to respond to you, like the president.
It was an enormous amount of work. It really was. And I had to work through official channels, so spokespeople, gatekeepers in some instance. Some of them were brilliant with helping me. Someone like Gayton McKenzie took forever to pin down. The president, I waited for a year. And I would send Vincent Magwenya message after message after message. And his diary is so full. And eventually, I was about to go to print. We were 2 days away from print. And I got a message from Vincent Magwenya saying, he can see you tomorrow at 11 at the foundation. Get Sidi to stand in for you.
He's even telling you who must stand in for you.
Yeah.
I bet you didn't believe that was going to happen.
It was already a month prior. I was supposed to have a Zoom meeting with him, and he just never arrived on the call. So I was like, I don't believe this until it happens. And in the end, he ended up giving me 80 minutes of time where he just spoke and spoke and spoke. And the president doesn't give interviews.
No.
He doesn't give interviews. So this was, and I do think that had I not had that interview, I would have felt like the book was incomplete, and I'm glad it happened.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I thought he was very frank with what he has shared with you. Let's go to some questions before we wrap up. Who's got the mic? Go ahead, brother.
Hi, my name is Tumedi Makhoba, and I have a question regarding what happened in the White House. Do you think the matter was going to be handled differently if maybe the election landscape was different? Or do you think it would have been the same output that we have now, which is a bit of like a ghosting situation? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it would have been different. I think if it was just ANC representatives, I don't think we necessarily would have seen Johan Rupert in the room. I'm not sure we would have seen John Steenhuisen in the room. And I think that also Ramaphosa was acting in a way that needed to also appease the GNU partners as well as Trump. And to have Steenhuisen there, I think was also important in terms of the optics of it. I think that had Ramaphosa gone in there just as the ANC, I think he probably would have been slightly more combative.
Yeah.
I know Clement was in the room.
I agree with you. Let's go to the more questions. Mic check, 1 2 1 2.
Good morning.
There we go.
Good morning, Clement and Mandy. I just wanted to ask Mandy, but probably after hearing how it took so long for you to get an interview with the president, maybe you might still be able to answer my question. I just wanted to find out, what do you think the state of the mind of the president was when he started his presidency? How he thought it was going to go, and what is he thinking now, especially with this turmoil that is taking place? Thank you.
A quick response, because I want to take 2 more questions.
So I got a sense from the president that he's aware of the issues that are happening in the country and the service delivery issues and all of that. But at the same time, I also got a sense that he was detached from reality in a way, because he genuinely thought that the 350 Rand social relief of distress grant was going to make a difference in the ANC's results. And I think that maybe he was disconnected from reality in that he didn't see it coming, that the ANC was going to do so badly. I think that he still is very hopeful, very intentional about where he wants the country to go. But I know that obviously people feel very differently about that.
All right, last two questions, quickly. You've got the mic, or whoever has the mic.
Hi, my question is actually to Mandy and Clement, if I can. The deal is about the elections and how the GNU came about. Can I ask you both your opinion on how you see the local elections next year coming about? What do you see the landscape will be? I know it's province specific, but do you see a big change in the landscape?
Messy. I think it's going to be messy. I think that we're going to see a further fracturing of the political landscape. I think we're going to see a big fight, and I think that's going to have an impact on the GNU and the stability of the GNU, but ultimately it will hold. I think the ANC, if you look at the last elections, is going to come out very bruised.
But I think it's going to be good for you and I as citizens, because politicians are under pressure now to put the best candidates. And I'm glad the DA did what it did with Helen Zille, because what it's done is put pressure on the ANC, Action SA, not just to put anybody out there, but to go back and think who can take on Helen, which works for you and I, because then we're spoiled for choice when we've got political parties putting the best of the best out there. The last question.
Thank you very much, Clement. Bongani here from Mayfair. Ms. Wiener, what an informative book. Blind people also wish to read this book in Braille. Don't you consider working hand in hand with the South African Library for the Blind to ensure that the book is in audio or also in Braille? Then lastly, Clement,
don't worry, we'll do that. We'll take a picture after this. Mandy?
Yeah, this is something with all my books that we have considered, and it's definitely something that I'll pass on to the publishing team because it's important. You know, I'm a big believer in literacy and in terms of making it as widely available as possible. So thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming through. Mandy Wiener, congratulations once again.
Everyone.
What an amazing book. Go check it out. It's titled The Deal: Inside the Talks That Shaped South Africa's Future. It's fascinating. You're not going to regret it. It's time now for the news.
This is EWN.